Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. What would you do if an HOA sent you a $10,000 bill for your own family property? They thought they could bully me into paying, but I found an expired document from 1994 that changed everything. Are you ready to see how I made them pay me instead? My parents bought our family property back in 1992, when this area was mostly farmland and the occasional rundown house. They got a good deal on about 15 acres that included a small pond, some woods, and enough open space for us kids to run wild. Dad worked construction and Mom was a nurse. They scrimped and saved for years to afford this place, and when they finally got the keys, it was the happiest I'd ever seen them. The property came with an old farmhouse that needed work, but Dad was handy and spent weekends fixing it up. By the time I was in middle school, we had a pretty nice setup. The pond was stocked with fish, we had a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree, and Mom had planted gardens everywhere. It was the kind of childhood you see in movies, except it was real. Around the time I started high school, things began changing in our area. A development company bought up the land surrounding our property and started building cookie-cutter houses. Within a few years, what had been quiet countryside was now a sprawling subdivision called Meadowbrook Estates. They put in streetlights, sidewalks, and all the trappings of suburban life. The houses sold fast. Young families moved in, eager for their piece of the American dream. Most of our new neighbors were friendly enough, though some seemed confused about why our property looked so different from theirs. We had trees where they had lawns. We had a pond where they had retention basins. Our driveway was gravel, while theirs were all paved. Shortly after the development was completed, the residents formed a homeowners association. My parents received an invitation to join, which they politely declined. We weren't part of their development after all. Our property had been here long before Meadowbrook Estates existed, and we saw no reason to subject ourselves to their rules about fence heights and approved paint colors. For a while, this wasn't an issue. The HOA did their thing, and we did ours. Then the complaints started. First, someone objected to our fence, which was old split rail that Dad had put up when I was little. Apparently, it didn't match the approved fencing styles for Meadowbrook Estates. Mom sent back a letter explaining that we weren't part of their association and therefore didn't need to follow their guidelines. Then came complaints about our unmowed grass. We had meadow areas where wildflowers grew. It was intentional and beautiful, but apparently some HOA busybody thought it looked unkempt. Again, my parents explained that we weren't under HOA jurisdiction. The complaints kept coming over the years. Our Christmas lights were up too long. Our vehicles were parked on grass instead of pavement. Our dog supposedly barked too much, which was ridiculous since Buck had passed away 2 years before that complaint. Each time, my parents calmly reiterated that we were not part of the HOA and didn't answer to them. Well, mostly calmly. I do remember one time when a particularly pushy HOA board member showed up during dinner. Dad told him to get off our porch and not come back. Mom had to calm Dad down afterward. But mostly they kept their cool. I went off to college, then got a job in another state. I'd come home for holidays and hear stories about the latest HOA nonsense, but it always seemed like minor annoyances. My parents handled it with grace and patience. Then Dad got sick. Cancer. It was aggressive and the treatment was brutal. He fought hard for 2 years before passing away. Mom was devastated. They'd been together since high school, and losing him broke something in her. She tried to keep up with the property maintenance, but it was too much for one person. I helped when I could, but I was hours away and had my own job and responsibilities. Mom lasted another year before her heart gave out. The doctors said it was a heart attack, but I knew it was grief. She just couldn't live without Dad. So at 39, I inherited the family property. I quit my job, sold my apartment, and moved back home. It felt right to be there, even though the house was full of memories that hurt. I started working remotely as a software consultant, which gave me flexibility and decent income. The pandemic had normalized remote work, so I could do this from anywhere. For the first few months, I focused on getting the property back in shape. The house needed repairs, the gardens were overgrown, and the pond had accumulated debris. I worked on it little by little, finding comfort in the physical labor. The HOA left me alone during this time. I assumed they were giving me space after losing both parents. I was wrong. They were just getting organized. About 6 months after I moved back, I received a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I opened it expecting another complaint about something trivial. Instead, I found a bill for $10,000. The letter stated that my property had been in violation of numerous HOA regulations for years. They itemized fines going back decades. improper fencing, unmowed grass, unauthorized structures, non-approved exterior paint colors, and about 20 other alleged violations. They claimed that while my parents had disputed HOA authority, a recent review of property records showed that a small corner of our land technically fell within the Meadowbrook Estate's boundary due to how the lots were surveyed. Therefore, according to their lawyer, our entire property was subject to HOA rules and we owed back fines totaling $10,000. The letter demanded payment within 30 days or they would place a lien on the property. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each pass. This was insane. Our property had been here first. We'd never agreed to be part of their association, and now they were claiming we owed them 10 grand in made-up fines? I called the number on the letter and got transferred to the HOA president, a guy named Richard, who spoke in that condescending tone people use when they think they're smarter than you. He confirmed everything in the letter and added that the HOA had been lenient with my parents, but now expected compliance and payment. When I pointed out that we'd never agreed to join the HOA, he said it didn't matter because of the boundary issue. When I said I'd fight this, he chuckled and told me that fighting would only rack up legal fees I couldn't afford. That's when I decided to dig into this properly. I wasn't my parents, who had been content to politely decline and move on. I was angry, and I had time on my hands. First, I pulled out all the property records my parents had kept. Deeds, surveys, tax records, everything. I spread it across the dining room table and started going through it systematically. What I found was interesting. Our property deed was crystal clear. 15 acres with specific boundary markers predating the Meadowbrook Estate's development by over 20 years. There was no overlap with their lots, no shared boundaries that would give them any jurisdiction. But here's where it got really interesting. In the box of old records, I found correspondence between my parents and the development company from when Meadowbrook Estates was being built. The developers had approached my parents multiple times trying to buy our land. They'd offered decent money, but my parents weren't interested in selling. One letter caught my attention. It was from the development company's lawyer, dated early 1992. It stated that they would need to use a small strip of our property for utility access during construction. They offered compensation and assured my parents it would be temporary, just during the building phase. My parents had agreed on the condition that it was documented as a temporary easement only. There was a signed agreement stating the developers could access a 10-foot strip along our eastern boundary for up to 2 years, after which all equipment and materials would be removed and the land returned to its original condition. I checked the dates. The easement had been granted in 1992 for 2 years, expiring in 1994. That meant they'd been trespassing for over 25 years. I went outside and walked the eastern boundary. Sure enough, there was still utility equipment on our property. Electrical boxes, drainage pipes, even a small utility shed. All of it sitting on our land, well beyond the 2-year temporary easement. I called a surveyor and paid for a proper boundary survey. It cost me about $200, but I figured it was worth it to have concrete proof. When the results came back, they confirmed what I suspected. Not only was there no overlap between our property and the HOA lots, but the HOA had been using a significant strip of our land for utilities since 1994, when that temporary easement expired. The utility shed they used to store equipment for maintaining the common areas on our property. The drainage system that handled runoff from their retention pond ran through our land. The electrical boxes that powered their fancy entrance sign and street lights, you guessed it, our property. I took photos, made copies of everything, and then I called a property lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in property rights and had a reputation for being aggressive. After hearing my case, she agreed to work on contingency. She'd take a percentage of any settlement, but I wouldn't pay up front. That was crucial because I didn't have thousands lying around for legal fees. During our first meeting, I laid out everything. The lawyer, an older woman who reminded me of a bulldog, reviewed the documents with increasing interest. When she looked up, she was smiling. The HOA had no claim to our property whatsoever, she explained. The boundary issue they cited was completely fabricated, but more importantly, they had been trespassing on our land for years with their utilities and equipment. Since the easement had been temporary and had expired in 1994, every day they continued using our property was a new instance of trespass. She asked if I wanted to go after them. I said yes. The lawyer drafted a letter that was a thing of beauty. It calmly and professionally explained that the HOA's claims were baseless and that we would not be paying their fraudulent bill. It then detailed the actual situation, that the HOA had been trespassing on our property since 1994 when the temporary easement expired. The letter demanded immediate removal of all equipment and structures from our land and included a bill for trespassing damages. My lawyer had calculated daily trespass fees based on what a commercial easement for that much land would cost, multiplied by the number of years they'd been using it without permission. The total came to just over $47,000. The letter gave them 30 days to respond, the same timeline they'd given me. My lawyer had studied the HOA's own bylaws, which they'd helpfully included with their demand letter. Turns out they had a formal dispute resolution process that required them to respond to property claims within 30 days or forfeit their right to challenge. They'd set up this rule to keep homeowners from dragging out payment, never imagining it would be used against them. By invoking their own bylaws in my response, they were trapped by their own bureaucracy. I sent it certified mail and waited. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Richard, the HOA president. He was no longer condescending, he was angry. He said the letter was ridiculous and that I was trying to extort the HOA. I calmly explained that I was simply asking for fair compensation for the use of my property, the same way they'd asked me for payment for alleged violations. He started yelling about how the utilities were necessary for the neighborhood and couldn't be moved. I told him that was his problem to solve, not mine. He threatened to fight this in court. I said I looked forward to it and hung up. The next contact came from their lawyer. It was more measured but still dismissive. They claimed the utility placement was grandfathered in and that removing it would be impossibly expensive. They offered to settle the whole matter by dropping their $10,000 claim if I dropped mine. My lawyer responded that we weren't interested in settling. Either they paid for the decades of unauthorized use or we'd see them in court. We also filed a formal trespass notice with the county, creating an official record of the violation. Things escalated from there. The HOA sent people to examine the property boundaries. I had security cameras installed to document any time they came onto our land without permission. Each unauthorized entry went into a log my lawyer was keeping. They tried going to the county to claim the utilities were essential infrastructure. The county reviewed the situation and determined that the utilities were the HOA's private infrastructure for their development, not public utilities, and therefore they had no special rights to place them on private property without permission. The HOA residents started getting involved. I received angry calls from neighbors saying I was being unreasonable and that the whole neighborhood would suffer if utilities had to be relocated. I pointed out that this wasn't my problem and that they should take it up with their HOA leadership who had created this mess by letting a temporary easement expire without securing a permanent one. A few neighbors tried the friendly approach, stopping by with cookies or wine to chat about finding a reasonable solution. I was polite but firm. My property rights weren't negotiable. 6 months into this standoff, the HOA made their biggest mistake yet. Frustrated that I wouldn't budge and facing mounting pressure from residents, they decided to start the process of relocating utilities themselves. One morning I woke up to find stakes and survey markers on my property, and later that day a construction crew showed up. I met them at the property line before they could start work. They said the HOA had hired them to relocate utilities and had assured them all permissions were in place. I showed them my survey and told them they did not have permission to be on my land or do any work. They called their supervisor, who called the HOA, and there was a tense standoff for about 20 minutes. The crew eventually left without doing any work, but the HOA's attempt to proceed without my permission was documented by my security cameras. I called my lawyer immediately and she was thrilled. They'd just handed us even more ammunition. The construction incident was the turning point. Suddenly the HOA was facing not just my lawsuit, but potential additional liability for authorizing work on property they didn't control. Their insurance company got involved and apparently read them the riot act. 2 weeks after the construction incident, I received a settlement offer. The HOA would pay $35,000 for past trespass damages. Their insurance company had negotiated down from my $47,000 demand. Sign an agreement acknowledging my property boundaries and their lack of jurisdiction over my land, and pay for professional relocation of all utilities currently on my property. My lawyer advised that while we might get more if we went to court, this was a solid offer that accomplished all our goals. The legal fees and time involved in going to trial could eat up the difference, and this gave me certainty. I accepted. The settlement process took another 3 months to finalize. The HOA had to hold a special assessment to raise the funds, which made me even more popular with the residents. People were paying hundreds of dollars each in special fees because their HOA had screwed up decades ago by not securing a permanent easement. The utility relocation took 2 months and required them to tear up part of their own common area to reroute drainage and electrical. I watched the work from my property with a certain amount of satisfaction. During this time, Richard resigned as HOA president. Apparently, the residents blamed him for the whole mess, even though the aggressive tactics and the original $10,000 demand had been endorsed by the entire board. The new president was a more reasonable person who just wanted the situation resolved without further drama or expense. When everything was finalized, I received a check for $35,000 and a signed agreement stating that my property was not now and had never been subject to Meadowbrook Estates HOA rules. The agreement also acknowledged that the temporary easement had expired in 1994 and that the HOA had no continuing right to keep utilities, drainage equipment, or storage structures on my land. The utility relocation took about 2 months. They had to tear up part of their own common area, reroute drainage, move electrical equipment, and remove the little utility shed they had been using for years without permission. I watched most of it from my side of the property line. I will admit, that part felt pretty good. Richard resigned as HOA president before the work was even finished. From what I heard, the residents were furious about the special assessment. They had to pay hundreds of dollars each because their HOA tried to scare me with a fake $10,000 bill and ended up exposing decades of unauthorized use of my land. The new president was much more reasonable. He just wanted the whole thing over, and after the agreement was signed, the HOA left me alone completely. No letters, no complaints, no fake fines, nothing. I used part of the settlement money to fix up the property the way Mom and Dad would have wanted. New roof, updated electrical, proper pond maintenance, and a clean boundary fence between my land and Meadowbrook's common area. The gardens are thriving again. The pond is stocked. The meadow grass grows where meadow grass belongs. The old split-rail fence is still there, and nobody has sent me a letter about it in years. I framed the settlement agreement and hung it in my home office beside a photo of my parents standing in front of the house when they first bought it in 1992. I think they would have loved that. They spent years politely telling the HOA no. They were patient, kind, and reasonable. I respect that. But when the HOA tried to turn their patience into weakness, I handled it my way. They sent me a $10,000 bill based on a made-up boundary claim. I sent them a $47,000 bill based on an expired easement, property records, and 25 years of trespass. They gave me 30 days to respond, so I gave them 30 days too. The difference was that my claim was real. These days I work from home, maintain the property, and live quietly. I am not looking for trouble. But if someone tries to claim what belongs to me, I know exactly where the records are, and I know exactly who to call. Meadowbrook Estates wanted control over my land. Instead, they paid me, moved their utilities, lost their president, and signed a document saying they never had authority over this property in the first place. My property, my rules, and now they have it in writing. The next one is a malicious compliance story. In the early years of being a pharmacist, jobs in my city were hard to come by. I managed to get full-time hours by working for a couple of pharmacist friends at both of their stores. They would work out my schedule together and put an X on my schedule on the days I was working at the other store. One store was downtown, and the other was in the suburb where I lived. At the suburban pharmacy, I had a coworker named Dee who could not seem to wrap her brain around the fact that if there was an X by my name, I was still working. I was just working at the other store. Multiple times, I would get call after call on my cell phone and hang-ups on my answering machine at home because she wanted me to cover her shift at the suburban store when I was already working downtown. The worst part was that my cell phone charged me for every single call. So after the second time she pulled this, I would get to the downtown store and immediately take the battery out of my phone. This made her angry because she thought I was ignoring her, and our relationship became chilly after that. Time went on, and the suburban store started expanding its nursing home operation, so I was able to work there full-time instead. I still had a great relationship with the downtown store, and they let me keep the keys in case of emergencies. Occasionally, emergencies came up and the X would be placed by my name on the suburban schedule. Sadly, Dee became the assistant manager and now thought she was the boss of me. One week, the downtown pharmacist's daughter was getting married and the suburban pharmacist was invited to all the festivities. I was scheduled to work the Thursday before the wedding at the downtown store. The X went by my name on the suburban schedule. I was also going to the wedding because I was good friends with the daughter, but I was missing the Mendy party on Thursday because I was working for her mother. During one break, I was on the phone with her and she was saying how sorry she was that I would miss it. I joked, "Do not worry, I will just doodle brown Sharpie all over my hands and pretend I was there when we are not busy." That same week, we were getting new pharmacy software installed. Nursing homes are run on a batch system where all the labels are printed about 5 days ahead of time. Then all the bubble packs are made during that time, and the actual billing is done on Thursday for the medications to be delivered Friday. Dee decided that for this first week with the new software, she did not want the batch done ahead of time. She wanted everything to be processed and made up on Thursday instead. My technician was panicking, so I told her to make up the usual drug cards without patient data, things like Lipitor, aspirin, multivitamins, L-Tas, and similar common medications just to help speed things along. Dee overheard and told the technician she was not allowed to do that. Then she added, "This younger generation is just scared of hard work." I panicked a little because I was the only person there in my age group. I was Generation X, while all my coworkers were boomer-aged or older. So I checked the schedule. Yep. There was an X by my name. I would not be there for the disaster, but somehow Dee thought I would be. Why should I tell her any different? Thursday rolled around, and at 12:30 my cell phone started blowing up. It was in my purse in the safe because I did not get a lunch break as the only pharmacist on duty, and everyone could hear it ringing. Out came the battery. When I got home after work, there was screaming and swearing on my answering machine. A locum pharmacist had worked the morning shift at the suburban store and had not been instructed to do anything, so everything had been left for Dee when she arrived at 12:30. She had to work late to finish more than 500 prescription drug cards. I came in the next day and she was still furious. "You said you were working. I heard you talking about that Mendy thing." I told her that I was working, just not at that store, as clearly shown by the X beside my name. That was when I learned she could eavesdrop on the break room from one specific spot in the pharmacy when she was the only pharmacist working. After that, I took all my breaks in my car. The next one is an entitled People Story. My best friend Kay works at an art center. It is mostly a museum and gallery, but they also do a lot of community programs, like offering art classes. Since they are a non-profit, they also have a small store where they sell items made by their instructors along with other little trinkets. Kay is not a Reddit user, which is unfortunate because she could post a dozen amazing stories about her stepdaughter, who is a true Kevin. But yesterday, when I was texting her to complain about how bad my Monday was, she said there must have been something in the air because she had a terrible day too. Then she told me this story. I have not been able to get it out of my mind because of the sheer audacity and entitlement of a stranger I have never even met, so I thought I would post it here. Kay works as the marketing director and grant writer for the art center. However, they were short-handed on Monday, so she was helping out in the small gift shop up front. Obviously, she's not used to doing things like applying discounts using the cash register or wrapping fragile purchases. One customer was getting very demanding and complaining that Kay was not moving fast enough while wrapping her fragile glass and ceramic art purchases. Then she complained that Kay was not applying the correct discounts. Then she complained that Kay needed time to look up the discount codes. In the middle of all this, the phone rang and Kay answered. It was a woman calling from several states away saying she used to teach art classes there. As a side note, I am sure the art instructors were paid, but it was a very small amount, something like $30 per class. I think the student's enrollment fee for a course, usually 4 to 6 classes depending on the type of art, was around $25. My point is, even if an instructor taught multiple courses at once, this was not the equivalent of a full-time job. It was more like something to keep a retiree busy. I only mention that because of how the phone conversation ended. Meanwhile, the customer in front of Kay was still complaining. A nice volunteer came over to help with the checkout, which was great, except volunteers are not supposed to access the cash register or handle money. Kay tried to ask the woman on the phone if she could place her on hold, but the caller said, "No, this will just take a minute." Kay thought, okay, she said she used to work here. Maybe she just wants to be transferred to the person who handles hiring so she can come back and teach, or maybe she wants to talk to someone else and reminisce. That should only take a few seconds. Regrettably, Kay said okay instead of insisting that the woman go on hold for a minute. So while the customer at the counter was loudly complaining, Kay was trying to process the credit card transaction while the volunteer wrapped the art purchases as quickly as possible to keep them from breaking. That was when the caller explained that she had been an instructor at the art center years ago and needed the contact information for her former students. Kay was not sure she had understood correctly, especially with all the commotion happening around her. The caller explained that she knew all her former students had to provide a phone number, email, or other contact information as part of their enrollment. She wanted that information. She was sure the art center kept those lists. She also said those former students were probably still taking classes with other instructors or had become members of the art center, but they had been her students, so she was allowed to contact them. She just needed all their names and numbers. At that point, the customer at the counter was making a huge fuss about the discount codes, and Kay realized this call was definitely not going to take just a minute. So Kay called over a program director who happened to be walking by and asked her to take over the phone call. Then Kay focused on the customer in front of her and applying all the correct discounts. Apparently that alone took several minutes because the customer wanted a 10% senior discount on top of a 5% membership discount, even though customers are only allowed to use one or the other. The whole time, the director was standing there beside Kay on the corded landline phone, saying things like, "Yes, I remember you. Well, that was almost 10 years ago. I do not know if we still have those sign-up sheets. You want the current student's information? But why? Do you need a reference?" Then there was a very long pause. You see, the caller explained that she had moved to a different state, had been unable to find a job, and was now living in a motel with no money. She needed to reach out to all her former students and tell them about her situation so they could send her money. According to her, she needed the names of her students because they loved her and would want to help her. She said she was entitled to keep in contact with them if she wanted to. But if the art center did not have her former students' information, then she wanted the names and phone numbers of current students instead. Her reasoning was that an art student would never let an art instructor suffer like she was, even if they had never met her. So she planned to call them all, explain her situation, and they would send her money once they knew. Needless to say, the art center did not consider that a valid reason to hand out private contact information. The caller kept pushing her sob story, trying to pull on heartstrings. Eventually, she became angry and started saying that if the art center refused to give her the names of her students, then they would have to rehire her. Then she said all they had to do was give her an advance on her paycheck so she could return to the area and find a place to live. When the director told her they were not hiring right now, the caller demanded to speak to a program director because these were her students and she needed to talk to them. Kay said the only silver lining of her terrible Monday was hearing the woman say, "I am the director, and my decision is final." Then she slammed the phone down and relayed the whole conversation to Kay. The caller did continue calling back, but they stopped answering calls from that area code for the rest of the day. I honestly wish the art center had a working answering machine or voicemail because I am sure those messages would have been hilarious. The next one is an entitled parent story. For context, my younger brother is 22 and unfortunately became addicted to drugs earlier this year. Starting around March, we have been trying to help him, but that is a whole separate situation. Right now, my mom and my brother have lost the apartment they had for less than 4 months. My mom is back at my grandma's one-bedroom apartment, and my brother is going back and forth between my grandma's place and my cousin's place. My cousin decided to take him in after I told her what was going on, even though I warned her not to because she has kids, but she made her choice. I have constantly helped them with money even before my brother's drug use started this year because my mom cannot keep a job. She never stays at a job longer than a week. There is always some reason for her to quit. I recently quit my job of 4 years because it was taking a serious toll on my mental health. I was having panic attacks every day and felt depressed, and all of this family stress was piled on top of that. My mom is always complaining about my brother not helping her with money, even before the drug use. She constantly complains about needing money from him, even though he works a hard construction job. Meanwhile, when he would come home from work, she would not even wash clothes or make food for him because, according to her, he is an adult and should do it himself. But she did not have a job and still expected money from him. Today she texted me this. She said that as of right now, she was disowning my brother because she was tired of his lies and drug use. She told him she did not want to see his face again until he got help. Then she said she was tired of his behavior toward her and that he was being awful to her. She also said he owed 2 months of car payments on his car and had not paid his insurance while my grandma kept giving him money. I told her that grandma should not be giving him money. I was typing a longer response about my grandma, but my mom texted back before I finished, so I deleted it. My mom then said my brother had lied and texted her that he only worked 23 hours, but she overheard him telling my grandma that he had made $500 or more and needed it for his insurance. She said he owed $1,200 on his car and asked where the rest of the money had gone. Then she complained that he had not offered her anything and that she always had to ask. She said maybe he spent it on his credit card or car stuff, like a battery. She also mentioned that my grandma let him use a credit card for AutoZone, and that my mom only used the card to put gas in her car because she was no longer receiving unemployment. For context, my brother and I have both helped her with her car payment. The last payment I made was in June, and I told her I really needed that money back in August. Of course, I never saw that money again. I told her, "Mom, that is one thing, but you are not entitled to get money from him." That is not his responsibility. If it is bills he agreed to pay, then yes, but mostly his own bills. He should not be taking money from Grandma, though. That is not her responsibility, especially when he is a known drug user. She replied, when you live as an adult, you help with bills. Then she said, so you are saying I do not count as a parent and he cannot help me once in a while? She also said, I do not ask for much. I told her that he has helped her, then I added that he has not helped lately because he told me he was done giving her money. She said, not a lot. Then she said she had done a lot as a parent and deserved to be respected. She told me that he had said hurtful things to her, blamed her for his drug use, and compared himself to our older brother who has not spoken to her in about 9 years. I told her, but kids are not supposed to be responsible for their parents' finances. We did not ask to be brought into this world. I help because I want to, but I am not obligated to help. She responded by saying my mentality was cold. Then she said she could not believe all of this was happening and that my grandma was acting like nothing was wrong. She said she would let me go. Then she added that grandma was apparently going to ask my aunt if she could help my brother with his car payment. Then my mom said she was being left out in the cold and made a guilt-tripping comment about wishing she had not survived a past health crisis because she felt overwhelmed. I have not replied yet. My little brother told me she has been guilting him too, saying similar things about wishing she were gone. I do not know what to tell her. Normally I would not be this cold, but I am fed up with everything. Anyway, thank you for watching.